right, I'm excited beyond measure for this one, and I'm ready to go down the deep rabbit hole on is the NFL fixed? Is the NFL rigged? And are sports rigged in general? And who better to have? There's no one better on the planet, in my opinion, anyway, my humble opinion, than Brian Tuohy on the show, author of The Fix is In and author of The Fix is Still In, right? Am I correct with that? The second title there?
Yes, 100%.
Man, excited to have you on. I had you on a couple years ago. That video got over like just under 250,000 views. And I'm just excited to dive into this because there's a huge interest for are sports rigged? Are they fixed? And now it's becoming a little more mainstream where it's becoming more and more obvious. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation. And I don't even know where to start, man. There's so much to talk about. I'll let you talk for a bit because this is going to be a deep rabbit hole that I'm excited to dive into, man, into like explicit detail on this.
Oh yeah, I mean we could start wherever you want. I mean
I mean,
it's because there's a whole gamut. Because it when I covered game fixing from two angles. So it goes from one angle is the gambling aspect of it, the games being fixed against like the point spread and that sort of thing, and then the other aspect I cover, which is the much more controversial side of it all, is whether or not games are fixed for entertainment purposes, where the league basically is manipulating games basically for television ratings and to keep certain storylines alive longer than they should naturally occur. And so those are they're two kind of separate but equal entities that cover this subject matter.
have you like you've had the books? When was the original book written? The Fix was in. When was that written? What year?
It was published in 2010. But I mean, I saw it basically written 2009, 2008, 2009.
Have you had any backlash from the mainstream, from the actual NFL themselves, or any sports leagues saying like back off, don't talk about this, anything like that? Has anyone emailed you suspiciously? Anything weird happened since you started producing this book and talking about this?
Well, interestingly, for the fixes in, no, nothing really happened, and that kind of I think it was more under the radar. The only thing that happened with the fixes in, actually, oddly enough, it was reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, of all places,
Right.
which was really kind of bizarre even for me. But what happened was the second book that I wrote, which is called Larceny Games, which is based off of all this FBI information that I uncovered through the Freedom of Information Act. Um, when that book was about to come out in 2013, my publisher was contacted by the likes of ESPN, Yahoo Sports, HBO Sports, um, 60
Right.
Minutes. I had an interview, talked with a couple of producers from 60 Minutes. Sports Illustrated said they were going to do an excerpt from the book in the magazine, and then all of that died. None of it happened. No one covered the book. Nobody reviewed the book. They all acted like it didn't exist, but that was the one that was based off of FBI information. I mean, it's stuff straight from the Freedom of Information Act. There was nothing that I made up. It was not a conspiracy. It was literally this is what the FBI found, and the FBI found that several Hall of Fame players from both the NBA and the NFL were likely gambling on their own games, if not outright fixing their own games, and nobody wanted that to come out in the media.
Sounds like the story of my life, trying to pretend I don't exist. I do this in the fantasy football industry all the time where I go against the grain. And I don't know if do you play fantasy at all,
Oh yeah,
Brian?
yeah, I've done it in the past for sure. Yeah.
So the biggest thing is every single year, the same magazines, networks come out with the same players that finished on top last year and tell you to draft them in that order. I call it copy and paste consensus rankings. And anything that deters from the truth, everybody tends to kind of fade and pretend it doesn't exist, right? So having a book like The Fix is In coming out, it's like let's not bring as much attention to this as we possibly can. Whereas in my case, I want to bring as much attention to this as we possibly can. And it's not just me anymore. Like I said, TikTok, Instagram influencers are now, consistently talking about the script and is the NFL fixed. And one thing I noticed that this year particularly, I remember that old, what your parents used to tell you and your teachers. If someone makes fun of you, laugh with them, right? It's kind of like, you're making fun of me, huh? And if you laugh with us, it doesn't seem as, it kind of lightens the situation and you're not really affected. And I found that more and more NFL teams, they were posting on their social media saying stuff like, hey man, here's our script. And actually asking players, their own players, is the NFL scripted, kind of making a joke out of it. So
Yeah.
from a joke perspective, do you think, well, I don't even want to get to the why and everything, but why do you think, okay, we're not going to answer the question of is the NFL fixed yet, like trying to get to a definitive answer yet, but why do you think the NFL is now kind of joking about this?
Well, I think because they're a little nervous. I think
Yeah,
because last year, if people remember right on Twitter, all throughout the playoffs, every Sunday, hashtag NFL, I think it was rigged, was trending and heavily trending because so many weird things happened in those playoff games with terms of calls and who won and that sort of thing.
right.
And I don't think the NFL, it didn't go unnoticed. I think they recognized what happened, saw it, and had to react to it. And I think the best way to react to it, like you said, is basically to make fun of it and be like, "Oh, ha ha, we're in on the joke," and then hopefully it'll go away. And if it does come back up, because I mean, they had that big whole advertising campaign when the season started, where they had the table
Yeah.
read with all
Yep.
the guys sitting around the table, and talking about, oh, this is how the script's going to go for this year, blah blah blah. But I think it really was a reaction to what was natural. What I've been working on for 15 years now is basically trying to show people that, hey, this is a very real possibility. This is what's happening, and this is the NFL's way of fighting back without acknowledging it directly.
I'm a thinker, right? I think outside the box. I always ask questions. I'm very inquisitive with a lot of my stuff. I don't really mess around. If something doesn't make sense to me, I ask questions. Why is this happening? If someone said to me, "Hey Joe, the sky is purple," I'm going to be like, "You know what? I'm looking at it, and to me, it looks a little grayish blue." And I'm going to say, and if everybody came together, if 1,000 or 100,000 people came to me and screamed, "Hey, Joe, the sky is definitely purple," I'm like, "You know what? No, I'm really seeing grayish blue. I'm going to kind of stick with that," right? So it's like the same thing with this. It's just like the mainstream just kind of wants you to believe, like, it's not fixed, right? So my thing is, it looks like you've asked a lot of questions now. I can go into. I got a bunch of examples here from Peyton Manning winning the Super Bowl before he retires to Ray Lewis, which I want to dive into before he retires, to Brady, after 9/11, becoming, coming out and being like a star on coincidentally the Patriots. There's so much to talk about here. But do you have a list of like 100? Because I don't believe in coincidences. I really don't. Do you have a
Either
list
way.
of 100? How many examples do you have that would kind of reinforce the fact that maybe this is in fact scripted and the fix is definitely in? Do you have a series, like a log sheet, a spreadsheet on this stuff?
No, no, I probably should have kept one, but I never did. I mean, what I've done, and it's not all on my website anymore because I changed and updated my website. But I mean, I think for probably, gosh, at least 10 years, I probably had like a running thing every NFL season. And each week I kind of do a weekly recap and say, look, here's how the storylines look like to progressing. Here are the games that had some, quote unquote bad calls in them. And how does all this, work together to get the result that the NFL may be trying to get? So, I mean, I kind of did that, but I never really kept a catalog of each game each week saying, oh, I think this one was fixed, this one was fixed. Because I don't believe all of them are fixed. I don't believe they all need to be fixed. I think
Yeah.
it's more of a thing where, the NFL, I don't think at the beginning of the season really legitimately scripts the season. It says, okay, this year the Chiefs are going to win and this is how we're going to make it happen. I think what happens is a league will see, okay, this storyline's emerging. This team suddenly is emerging. Like, Aaron Rodgers on the Jets this year. That was going to definitely be a storyline that the NFL wanted to push and push it as far as it could. And so when they see those storylines emerge or certain athletes start, exceeding expectations, maybe then they start crafting things and then start telling referees, hey, look, give these guys a little more of a break, come down harder on their opponents and just tweak enough games so you can get them into the playoffs and then they can really, really muck with games if they want to in the playoffs because it's a one and done situation.
Definitely. Like, so if like, you're mid-season or late and then all of a sudden, God forbid, one of the players has a bad disease or something like
Yeah,
that.
gets hurt or whatever.
Yeah, all of a sudden that guy starts becoming a hero, and it just happens that that city just got hit by a hurricane. Let's talk about Katrina with the Saints, right? Like, and all that
Yeah,
stuff. So it's like, and then it just kind of flows, and they kind of alter to make sure that that storyline emerges,
yeah,
which
just massage it. That's all it takes.
it's good. But then I've talked about my friends about this. I'm like, this definitely fixed and all this stuff. And here's an example. But then they're like, okay, well, let's say the two crappy teams with no storyline theoretically still make a storyline out of something that really isn't a storyline. So, for example, if a team just sucked all year and they emerged, well, they sucked and emerged. So that's the underdog story. Like, so what my friends say to kind of counteract this thinking is like anything could be a storyline, number one. And number two, it doesn't really matter because they're still going to sell out those seats, right? So, what do you say to people that say that?
Well, because it does matter. And then you have to remember, too, like the NFL, for example, 80% or more of all revenue is shared. So it behooves the NFL to get the best and maximize everything because every team benefits from that.
Right.
So if you have, the team that goes 17-0 and team that goes 0-17, essentially they're going to make the same amount of money. But if the team that goes undefeated becomes more of a storyline and has Taylor Swift showing up at games who sells more, jerseys and T-shirts for that team, that's benefiting all the teams because even the T-shirt money and stuff is going split equally amongst all 32 teams. So it behooves the league to make sure certain storylines happen because I mean anybody can craft a story out of any game, but certain ones are definitely more compelling. I mean, you have to be naive to think that they're not, because I mean you can only fake so much too, because I mean you look at like the Tim Tebow run that one year at the end of the season for the
Yeah.
Broncos. I think that was really 100% crafted by the NFL once it became kind of a megastar right off the bat. But he was a terrible quarterback. And you couldn't fake that. You couldn't get him a 10-year career out of Tim Tebow because he just wasn't that good. And he can only protect a guy so much. So you have to have certain athletes. You have to have the Aaron Rodgers and the Patrick Mahomes and those sort of guys because they can do things other players can't do. But then if you give them a little extra bubble, a little extra cushion to work within, then you're going to see them win more games, put up better stats, and become more of a story. But like you say, yeah, you can make a story out of everything, but you don't want to. There's no reason to.
Right.
I mean,
Since
because
you
gambling affects things too. Because I mean, with the emergence of gambling and even fantasy football, it's going to make people watch every game anyway, in a sense. Because a gambling fan, a player playing fantasy football, almost every game becomes interesting on some level, just because of that interest from their own monetary perspective.
In your opinion, because you talk about the gambling aspect, how does Vegas get it so close? I mean, sometimes they're way off. Things happen, upsets happen, but with they're like -3 this team, +3 this team. Do they have like an algorithm based on historical data that spits out these spreads every week, or is it like part of the script? The NFL makes a phone call, says, "Hey, we got to get the Ravens winning this week, this and that. We need to keep this between this." All in, cahoots with the referees, like, because it's pretty damn close. Like they're within, a field goal sometimes, and that team ends up being within a field goal or whatever, right? Like it's so
Yeah.
close, so often, and so hard to win on the spreads. And then you always get that like one weird upset or two weird upsets every single week. The game that like it was a couple weeks ago, right? And I think it was the Chiefs playing the Broncos. And that game, dude, that was a lot because I think the Broncos got blown out the week before. For all you guys listening, this show is going to be evergreen. So we're talking about the 2023-2024 season. It was, the Chiefs are a hot team. The Broncos were playing like crap with Russell Wilson. And like I said, the Broncos got blown out, I think, a week or two before, and then they played the Chiefs and they beat them. So something's fishy there. And yeah, you could say any given Sunday football, but do you think there's something going on there from the betting aspect?
You know, yes and no. I mean, because one thing is people always say, well, Vegas wins. Well, define for me Vegas. Because, I mean, there's multiple corporations that run multiple different sports books, and all those corporations are not in cahoots with each other. So to say that, okay, Vegas won and Vegas is in on it, I find it to be too broad of a term
Right.
because there is no just Vegas. If there was one company that ran all the sports books, then you could say, okay, fine. But there's so many, you can't just say Vegas is in on it. And doing my research that I did, I talked to guys who run sports books, who ran sports books in the past. And when I would just ask them, hey, did you ever have any contact with the NFL or NBA in any fashion? And I believe these guys, to be honest, they said, no, we never heard from them whatsoever. So, I mean, I think they were just really good at setting numbers. Certain guys were kind of savants. They had their methodology of making up the numbers for the point spreads. And I think a lot of times, too, it's selective memory where you remember the certain ones that were close, where Vegas said it was going to be a 3-point game and it ended exactly as a 3-point game, or this team was favored by 7 and they won exactly by 7. So I think you tend to remember those games more often than the ones that Vegas, quote unquote, was very far off on. But when you have a league like the NFL now that is getting more and more in bed with the gambling industry, then I think it does start raising some red flags, and you wonder how deep those connections and those, associations run, because the NFL is not stupid. The NBA is not stupid. They know gambling fans, betting fans, are fans who are going to tune in to watch every game, no matter how meaningless it may seem in the season. when they got money on it, they're watching. So the question is, now is there becoming more of an influence? And it's something that I can't prove, but I assume exists just because of the monetary aspect.
Now, I'm not a psychic or anything like that, but I'm pretty intuitive with things, right? So now there's more and more props, right? There's more and more
Yeah,
props
in-game
sites.
betting and that sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, over unders to in-game betting, stuff like that. I'm a firm believer, and intuitively, I feel that certain players, not all of them, might be involved somehow, and also particularly coaches. And one thing that I'm noticing from a fantasy perspective is that more and more coaches are now running running backs. I'll give you a quick running back committees, I should say. For
yeah.
example, this year, Bijan Robinson was drafted eighth overall, something like that. First overall pick by the Falcons, right? Now, I've never seen this is again, this I've noticed this real transition this year in the 2023-2024 season where running backs that are drafted with high draft capital are being benched for bottom feeder running backs who were drafted in the fifth round. Again, I'm using Bijan as an example because they're running Algier, they're running their tight ends near the goal line. It almost feels like they're purposely trying to screw props tickets and fantasy teams. And I think Arthur Smith says something about like, something about fantasy, or I don't care about your fantasy, or I'm going to run who I want. I can't remember the exact quote, but what I'm finding is literally like they're purposely letting these workhorse guys with high draft capital, with great talent, sit. And a perfect example was Jahmyr Gibbs as well. They kept running David Montgomery, who has sucked for years. They're bringing in a first overall pick. I think the Lions moved up to get Jahmyr Gibbs. And then he was on the bench. He was being benched. Same with Bijan. David Montgomery goes down. Gibbs tears it up. But he was literally hindered by a coach's decision to say, he's our best talented player, but we're just going to bench him just because. So I'm a firm believer that coaches are in on this. Because have you heard anything inkling that maybe a coach could be involved, especially now with more props sites coming up, more and more?
Well, not directly, but when you look at it, if you expand it out, if you look at things globally in terms of betting and sports betting, in-game prop betting is a huge, huge thing. And it's really big in sports like soccer and like tennis and cricket and that sort of thing. And they've seen worldwide where athletes are directly involved in fixing just in-game events.
Right.
Because you can bet, like in soccer, you can bet on who gets the first yellow card. Well, if you're a player, an athlete who maybe he's not making much money or whatever, and you have somebody bet for you that you're going to get the first yellow card, you can make that happen like that, right?
Right.
And I mean the same thing in tennis. I mean they can just bet on who's going to win the second game of the second set. And if a player wants to, they can win the match, but they can lose that specific game. They can make more money than if they win the match just by betting against themselves on that thing that they can control. So with the in-game betting in sports now here with Major League Baseball betting, you can basically bet on almost every ball and strike. In the NFL, you could bet in, like you say, on certain prop bets, how many yards the guys get, who will be a first touchdown scorer, an anytime touchdown scorer. It's not impossible to think that somebody is not trying to make money off of this, and that somebody is not controlling it, because it's very easy to control. Because, like you said, I mean, who's tracking it? I mean, supposedly the NFL and all these leagues have integrity monitors, and the betting companies have integrity monitors, and everybody's watching what everybody's betting, which is how they caught Calvin Ridley and
Yeah.
some of the other Lions this year on betting on games. But not everybody's that dumb to get caught and
Yeah.
bet that obviously. So who's to say somebody's cousin isn't betting for them and tell them, hey, I bet you on you to score a touchdown, go out there and score a touchdown, or I bet against you to score a touchdown, so don't score a touchdown. Those in-game things are very easy to manipulate. They're very difficult to catch, but yet they can be highly profitable for whoever's betting on them.
Yeah, I found out. I just Googled this stuff here, and I read this line. It says the NFL. I think you mentioned this on our last time around the show. The NFL is recognized as entertainment, and they can legally fix these games. Is that true? Legally
That's
fix
me.
them? What's
That's
that?
my quote.
That's your quote. Yeah, I saw it
Yeah.
on Google. Okay, so can you rephrase that quote properly and why? And if it is possible, then why wouldn't they? Right? If they can legally fix the games, why wouldn't they do it? Right?
Well, I always make the analogy of like McDonald's. If McDonald's found an additive, a food additive that they could stuff into their cheeseburgers that was legal for them to do, that was cleared by the FDA, and it made their hamburgers taste better every bite you took, McDonald's would put that in their hamburger tomorrow, right? Because they're going to sell a million more burgers if they taste that much better. Well, that's what these sports leagues can do. They can legally manipulate or outright fix their own games. There's no law that prevents them from doing this because it is entertainment. The two laws that come closest to preventing this, one is the quiz show law from the 1950s, which really only affects intellectual contests. So, like games like Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, you can't fix, but it doesn't mean you can't fix Survivor or American Idol or The Bachelor or whatever because they're
Right.
not intellectual contests. And the other law that exists is called the Sports Bribery Act in 1964, and that just relates to people bribing a coach, a referee, or an athlete to fix the outcome of a game. Well, if you don't bribe somebody, if the guy decides to do it on his own, guess what? He's not breaking the law. If the NFL tells
Right.
its referees, hey, go out there and referee this game in this manner, it's not breaking that law. So there's no law that prevents this. And a lot of people say, well, then it would just be fraud. They'd be defrauding people. Well, if it's just entertainment, you're not defrauding anybody because it'd be like, you go to see a professional wrestling match and you expect The Rock to win tonight and The Rock lost to some schlub. Well, you can't sue the WWE because the wrong guy won the match. And it's the same with the NFL or the NBA. You can't sue them because somebody didn't play. You can't sue them because some team won. You can't sue them because some team cheated even. If an NBA team is tanking, you can't sue them because they're tanking. So there's nothing that prevents this from happening. So if they're allowed to do it, why wouldn't they do it? Because, like you said, it's going to make games more interesting. It's going to keep people tuned into the very end. It's going to create these storylines, and then it's going to profit everybody in the league because they're all sharing this revenue.
Okay, I mean, what do you mentioned Kelce before and Swift. What there is some again, I don't believe in coincidences, but
No,
you have Kelce on the Eagles, then they brought in DeAndre Swift ironically, right? Like he came in now he's on the Eagles, he was on the Lions, so you got Kelce and Swift on the team. Then you have Travis Kelce dating Taylor Swift, dating. Well, I don't know if that's even I don't think they really are because
I don't.
I'm not sold on this at all. Then
Me either.
I don't want to go down the big pharma rabbit hole and all that stuff. But then he does an ad for big pharma, which quickly coincides with him getting together with Taylor Swift. So it's a push there. There's a money push there from big pharma. Then they get together, and now I believe they're building another storyline with the Eagles and the Chiefs yet again. Is this building for another like a Super Bowl thing again? Like what's this whole Swift Kelsey thing?
I hope you're not right. Let's put it that way. I hope you're not right because it. I don't believe in coincidences either, and especially when it's a $1 billion industry like professional sports, I definitely don't believe in coincidences. But like same thing, I don't really believe the Taylor Swift dating Travis Kelce story at all. It seems made up. It seems manipulated. It seems forced. It doesn't seem real. And like you said, the whole Travis Kelce becoming just a sudden superstar doesn't even make sense.
No.
'Cause like you said, not only did he do that ad with the get your COVID shot and your flu shot at the same time, but now he's on, the State Farm ads. He's doing the Chunky Soup ads. He's on a couple other ads as well. I mean, he's
Yeah.
all over the place. And that's exactly the same time he starts dating Taylor Swift. I mean, it seems really bizarre. And like you say, then you have that weird coincidence with his brother being teamed up with DeAndre Swift. I, it does seem way too coincidental to be just coincidental. Now, whether that means they're really going to match up in the Super Bowl or not, it's hard to say because that's still a ways to wait. But I mean, they're both really good teams. It's very likely that a rematch could occur, and would really anybody be upset if it did?
I mean, it is smart marketing, right? To bring
Yeah,
in all of the Swifters or whatever they're called. I
Swifties,
don't,
yeah.
whatever. I don't even. I thought she was. I get her confused with that other one, Miley Cyrus. When they said Taylor
Okay.
Swift, like, is that Miley Cyrus? Like, I don't even know the day. Like, if you put Miley Cyrus and Swift in this, I would think it's the same person. I have no idea. I have no idea about Taylor Swift. I don't even. If you said name me a Taylor Swift song, I wouldn't know. I'd probably say I kissed a girl and I liked it. That song, like I don't know.
No, that's Katy Perry. You're
Okay,
wrong.
see, like I get them all confused. Katy Perry, Kylie Minogue, like I don't even know. Like anyway, don't ask me anything about singers, especially these female singers. I have no idea. I don't listen to them. But anyway, I think it's a smart marketing thing to put them all together and make it happen. But I think that helped propel, Kelsey more into these ads and into the mainstream. So I guess it's a smart move by the NFL and Taylor Swift because now I don't even know if she's drawing in the NFL audience, but I think it's more annoying. I think it drives me nuts. I don't even want to see her
Yeah.
and Mahomes' girl there screaming and his brother. It's become a big thing, and I guess they need to build somebody up since Brady retired. Like, what are they going to talk about?
Well, that's just it. They need. I mean, I think the NBA's in worse shape from that fashion where the NBA had Jordan, it had Kobe, it had LeBron, and now it kind of doesn't have anybody. And I think they're really great. I mean, they should have Giannis from the Bucks. Should be the guy, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's personality or what, but they don't have a guy that they could put on a pedestal like that. And
Yeah.
I think the NFL is kind of in the same boat, slightly, not as bad, but same thing. They had Brady on a pedestal. Now they're trying to put Mahomes on there, but at the same time, it's like, well, maybe not him. Maybe we should push, maybe we should do Jalen Hurts. Maybe we should
I
try
really like
Tua.
Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts should be the guy, but he's not a diva. That's why I don't
No,
think they like him. But I love him. That's a player I like. I like Jalen Hurts because the head down, work ethic,
but he's not the media sensation that they need and want. Because I mean that's what the marketing is about. That's what creates the storylines. It's not really teams anymore, it's quarterbacks. It's
yeah.
it becomes like a heavyweight fight between, Justin Herbert and, Patrick Mahomes. It's not the Chiefs Chargers, it's the quarterbacks facing off. The other guys, the other 52 guys on the team, who cares? They're just supporting cast members to these quarterbacks. And that's what the NFL wants and that's what the NFL needs because they know that's what drives the ratings is the quarterback matchups. But you got to have guys who are talented enough who can produce at that level, and then you allow the referees to kind of tweak things to make sure that they even produce better. But I think that's what it is they got to find that guy that they can put on a pedestal to have everybody rally around. And if you have to throw in Kelce and Taylor Swift to make Mahomes the guy, well, that's what you try to do.
Okay, let's talk about some weird coincidences that could prove that the NFL is rigged. Again, this is one sport. I just saw a recent sport with Tyson Fury, recent fight with Ngannou. Ngannou knocked him down, I think, in the third round, looked like the better fighter. Why would you let an MMA guy who's unranked come in and beat your top heavyweight, right? So we can come. Yeah, let's talk about that first. Let's talk about that. Ngannou and Fury. Did you watch that fight? Or any parts of
No,
it?
no, I didn't watch it. I couldn't.
But why would you
Boxing is kind of. I mean, boxing is a corrupt history, like just begin with. But go ahead. What's
But
the
do you like they couldn't just let him win, right? They had to let their champion win because he's got to go on, and like you can't just let an MMA guy come in and just beat your top guy, right? Unless he knocks
no?
him clearly.
No, I don't think boxing could afford that. I mean, that would really been a really, really bad thing for boxing because so many people have said, well, they call boxing what the sweet science
Yeah,
because it's more, of a formal fighting style than MMA where anything goes and that sort of thing. So to have a guy come from that universe right into the boxing ring and then, like you say, knock out potentially your biggest heavyweight, title holder you've had in recent memory is not a good thing for boxing.
yeah.
So I mean, why they even put the fight on? I can see why they put the fight on marketing reasons and money reasons, but to have a result that would have gone the opposite way would have been really, really bad for the sport.
Yeah, and the judges picked Fury to win that fight, which again a lot of people thought that was a fix, and again more obvious stuff. So that's an example. Again, let's just give you a couple. These are a couple examples I wrote down off the top of my head here, and there's a bazillion more for sure, and they can't all be coincidences, right? So, for example, here there was the AFC Championship last year. It was, I think, the Bengals versus the Chiefs, and it was like Burrow. One of the play calls where they called intentional grounding, but he threw the ball near a player, Samaj P. Ryan, whatever his name is. And then it was like holding calls that were out of whack. And like, it was just weird calls that helped push, the Chiefs into the final. So that's kind of a first one that jumps out at me. I don't know if you've heard much about that game.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
there's,
don't remember the specific instance, but I mean, there's enough games like that out there where, again, you know, many calls in the NFL are subjective. You know,
yeah.
false. I mean, it used to be false start wasn't subjective, but even that's becoming somewhat subjective. 'Cause I've seen enough guys that I think are jumping that don't get flagged for it. But for the most part, the major fouls in the NFL, holding, pass interference, those things are very subjective calls. And you
Roughing
can
the passer too. There
roughing
was
the passer.
a game yesterday I was watching, and again I think it was Burrow again, and they came at him, and it was just a normal tackle. At the end of the tackle, his head kind of whipped back, and again that was nothing on the guy just the way he fell. Right, it was an
Yeah.
awkward fall, roughing dude, and everybody was saying it was not roughing the passer. Type of weird, it is subjective. That's another thing that bothers me. It's like you can sway a game one way or another. And I saw a video
Oh,
recently where I think I can't remember what game it was, where the ref literally just picked up the ball and like moved it back, and it wasn't a first down, but it could have been a first down. He literally did it right in front of everybody, picked it up, pushed
Yeah.
it back a yard. I'm like, can you,
I
like,
think that was
how?
I think that was in a Brown. I think it was a Browns Cardinals. No, not Browns. It was
Something, I think
Browns
it
game. I forgot
maybe.
who they were playing, but yeah, he literally moved it back like foot and a half, 2 feet from where it was spotted. Where everybody assumed that's where the ball was. He was like, "No, it's here," and nobody, like you say, batted an eye at it. And there's been a lot of times too where you've seen the ball, and they put the marker down, and they'll be like, "Well, if you lean the post this way, it's not a first down. If you lean it that way, it is a first down." And I've seen that. And that's the thing is so much of this in every balls and strikes in baseball, most basketball penalties in the NHL, a lot of the football penalties are very subjective. And that's why the referees can control and manipulate these things.
And it's taunting.
Because
There's a lot of taunting as well. I think it was Josh Allen just ran near the end zone and got a touchdown. He pointed. All he did
yeah,
is point. I don't see a problem with pointing. You didn't give him. I mean, if you point with the middle finger, that's a different thing. He just regularly pointed. What's the problem with that? Who cares? Who
yeah,
cares? It's competitive sportsman. We're playing football here, everybody. You got to man up a little bit. That's another thing. It's getting soft too.
true. Yeah, it is. But like you say, it's the subjectiveness that's really the problem. And it's something that none of these leagues can get away from. But it also, when you see so many subjective penalties going against one team or in the favor of another team, especially over the course of a season, because I mean, I live in Wisconsin and I unfortunately have to watch Packer games almost week after week. And when they had not Brett Favre, when they had Aaron Rodgers, you would see week after week all the subjective calls almost always went the other way. It was always went in the Packers' favor. Now, amazingly, Rodgers isn't there, and the Packers are like the most penalized team in the league. Go figure. Could it be
Yeah.
because the referees were giving him a break because they wanted Aaron Rodgers to succeed because he was one of their number one star players?
Yeah, another thing, when I go back to when I believe that players and coaches are in on it, certain players, there was again, maybe because I had a big ticket on it this one time. I was gonna hit a parlay. It was like a 9 game parlay. This is going back probably 2014, something 15, something like that. And I had like 9 picks in, and he was like, all I needed was, I think, the Packers to cover. I can't remember exactly, but I remember that specific game. Aaron Rodgers was not trying. He just was not trying. So it's weird. And then it goes back to that time with Cam Newton in the Super Bowl where he could have
Oh,
jumped on the ball. It was like a fumble. He didn't jump on it.
no, I
So
just looked at it. It's like, well,
do,
yeah.
do you think there's a chance, with your research, your expertise, do you think there's a small outside chance that they pull them into a room and say, hey, listen, Cam Newton, here's the deal. We want Peyton Manning to win his last Super Bowl before he retires. What we're going to do here, Mr. Cam Newton, is here you go. You get a contract deal right here. We're going to put it in ink. We're going to guarantee your family is covered and your grandchildren for the rest of their life. Here's an extra check of $30 million. Dollars. Just zip your mouth, lose this game, and never talk about it ever again. Do you think that there's a chance that this could happen? Because why would you not jump on a fumble? Why would you give up games? How could you? I've seen MMA fighters just fold like launchers. They're tough, but all of a sudden they just fold. So it's, I don't know, man. It's just strange. Do you think there's a chance? I mean, I'm a little, I'm
Oh,
reaching a little bit here, but I don't know.
no, I
Maybe.
don't. I don't think you're reaching at all. I think there's a very real chance that that happens. I don't. I think. I don't think it happens a lot, and I don't. I definitely think nothing is written down because they don't want any proof or evidence
Right, right. Good
existing.
point.
But I think it's one of those things where, like, when the Saints won the Super Bowl when they beat the Colts, Peyton Manning was their quarterback for the Colts,
Yeah.
and he missed a lot of passes. He threw that interception right to, I forget who it was on the Saints, but who returns it for a touchdown that basically sealed the game. Well, Peyton Manning grew up in New Orleans. His dad was Archie Manning. He was the quarterback for the Saints for what, like a dozen years. I mean, he had more connection to that city than most of the players on the Saints had, and I think it's very possible that the NFL said a little quid pro quo. Peyton, you lose this game for us because we want the Saints to win.
We'll give you
We
another
want
one.
to wrap that up. We'll give you one down the line. And then you had Super Bowl 50 where he went out, as the sheriff and on top of the world and all that. And I think that it's very real that some, backroom agreements are made. But I also think at the same time, you can't force athletes to perform at, give 110% all the time. And that was always interesting to me when I did this research and was looking at these FBI files that I obtained. The FBI would have extremely credible evidence coming from what they call top echelon informants, where a bookie would say, this guy is working with this quarterback and they're going to fix Sunday's game. And they're going to make sure the quarterback's going to make sure his team loses. And they would look at the game, and the quarterback would go out for like 160 yards and 3 interceptions and fumble the ball once. And the FBI would be like, well, it doesn't prove that he fixed that game. He could have maybe just had a bad game. Now, all the circumstances that we know of point to him probably fixing that game, but maybe he just had a bad game. And that's why the NFL can say they've never had a game fixed, because in these circumstances, the FBI couldn't do anything about it. They had to have some physical evidence. They had to have, a phone tap or something that proved to them that these guys indeed fixed that game. But you see enough, again, coincidences where some guy underperforms in a big stage, like say Cam Newton watching a ball roll around on the ground instead of trying to pick it up in that circumstance. And then the way he acted after the game, because Cam Newton acted really strange in the post-game press conference on that Super Bowl, and you just wonder, was some sort of deal made, and that it wasn't just a bad game, but he had some reason to have that bad game at that point in time.
Okay, let's keep going through these coincidences. So AFC Championship 2023, the Bengals, really some weird calls that pushed the Chiefs in. You got Brady after 9/11, right? The underdog story, Patriots. You got Katrina in 2005 happening. And I think the Saints won the Super Bowl in 2010 after things were starting to clear up there, giving everybody hope and moving forward. I heard Sean McVay, again, through the Ukraine thing, as someone was saying that, with the team colors, they're like Ukraine colors with the Rams. And then they coincidentally build a stadium. They bring in veteran Matt Stafford. They beef up that offense. They have this historical Cinderella year, win the Super Bowl. You got the Kelce brothers coming together. Great storyline. You had the Harbaugh Bowl years ago. The brothers, great storyline there. You got Peyton Manning throwing beach balls in 2016, winning the Super Bowl against a super-powered, young, high-octane Cam Newton, and he just folds when it comes in. Again, Peyton Manning looked like garbage that game. You have Ray Lewis, I think it was 2013, before he retires. He walks off with a Super Bowl, and on and on and on. And again, the subjective calls, like, again, am I crazy to think that at this point is it fixed? Like, at this point, I don't think it's crazy because there's so many coincidences, right?
Well, I think that's the big thing is, people can call it a conspiracy theory. They say you can't prove it. But again, you look at all the coincidences, like you point out, and then you say, well, how come a lot of them never happened? Because they had hashtag Vegas strong after the Vegas shooting, and then the Golden Knights, which were a expansion team in the NHL, made it to the Stanley Cup Finals that year. Then you had hashtag Boston strong after the Boston Marathon bombing, and you had both the Red Sox and the Boston Bruins make it to the World Series and the Stanley Cup Finals that year. Then you had hashtag Houston strong after the hurricane hit Houston. That was the same year the Astros won the World Series when they're supposedly banging on garbage cans, behind the scenes. But it's so often that these storylines come to fruition, and it's how many times can you believe that it's just coincidence, that it just happens? I mean, enough of this should be enough evidence to prove to people that this isn't all coincidence, that there's something going on, because we're not making any of it up. It's not just like made up nonsense. It's real. It's just a question of how far are you willing to really go to those conclusions? Because yes, you don't have explicit proof like a sheet of paper, a contract that says this was what happened, but use your own eyes and see what happened. And I think you'll realize that because it is entertainment, because they can do this legally, what's preventing them from doing it? Because those are the best stories that are out there.
As bettors, as viewers, as fantasy players, as fans, how does this negatively impact us, really? I mean, if, like, again, if it's fixed, then maybe you can bet based on the fix and say, because again, it worked for me because I knew Peyton Manning was going to win that Super Bowl. I'm like, yeah, they're definitely giving Peyton another one. I saw this before, and I did well that year, right? So doesn't it kind of like help us in a way? So can't you kind of say, oh, I think the Kelce Bowl is coming again, and I could bet that that they're going to make it. Like, so is it negatively impact us? Is it positive? What are the ramifications if in fact it is fixed, which I believe it is based on all this proof, right? Like, what are the ramifications?
Well, two things. One is a lot of people tell them I ruin sports for them because I wake them up to the reality of what's going on, which I'm fine with. It's up to you. I mean, I don't tell people not to watch sports. I just try to inform them so they watch sports with a different eye, with a different perspective, and realize what it is that they're consuming. That this is entertainment. It's not necessarily pure competition. So in one way, it could ruin things for people. But on the other side, like you mentioned, I know people who I've talked to professional gamblers who actually utilize this kind of idea for when they make bets. Because, like you said, if you see something telegraphed, like, I mean, to me, I agree with you. that Peyton Manning Super Bowl 50, seemed like it was telegraphed for months.
Yeah.
Like you just knew it was coming. And so why not bet on that assumption? Because sometimes that's the best thing to do. I mean, you can, some of these things are, like you say, literally almost telegraphed by the sports, by the media, by the broadcast partners of it all. So yeah, take advantage of it and use it, because there are many times when, these primetime games, like for the past couple of years, primetime games have almost always come down in the NFL to the final 2 minutes or the final drive, because it's like they're keeping them interesting to the very end to keep people watching. And if you're a better and you see a big point spread, and these are always coming down to one score games, you know what? Take advantage of it. Jump on it, because
Yeah.
that's going to happen more often than not.
Take the team to cover for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
others,
even if you think it's going to be a blowout, just take the team that's going to cover, because it seems like bad teams somehow step it up during, primetime football.
so in summary here, I want to talk about other sports too as well, but in summary here, like, is the NFL fixed? Are professional sports fixed? In your honest opinion, based on all your research, all your data, you live and breathe this stuff. You do this full time. Do you still do this full time? Are you working on these?
No, not full time, but I mean, I've done it for 15 plus years now.
You're immersed in it. You've written big
Yeah,
books on it. You've
exactly.
done the research. In your honest opinion, okay, is the NFL rigged, and are other sports rigged? And again, why would they really do it? I guess it's just a money thing, right? So to answer the question, is it rigged?
Yeah, I believe it's all rigged. I believe every professional sports takes advantage of this, whether it's the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, soccer, cricket, rugby, tennis, whatever. They all do it, because wherever money is, corruption follows. I mean, there's corruption in business, there's corruption in politics, there's corruption in religion. Wherever there's big money, corruption follows. And for sports fans to think that somehow professional sports are innocent to this, I think is just very naive thinking, because there's too much money at stake. There's too much money on the line, and they have the mechanisms to do this. The only thing that's supposedly stopping leagues from fixing their own games is integrity. And if you believe any of these leagues actually have integrity, good for you. But I can't. I just can't. I mean, do you think of steroids in the games, players doing drugs, players gambling, what have you? Integrity's out the door. It's been out the door for decades in all these sports. But that's what you think is protecting your sport from being rigged, is integrity?
Yeah,
Good, go with that.
I talked about it a lot. I talked about it last time you were on. My late uncle now, he said that it's like he's been watching hockey for years. Like, how come as of late? I think the last time two Canadian hockey teams made the Stanley Cup final together, I can't even remember. It's probably like the early '90s, late '80s or something. It's
It's
like,
longer than that.
what's that?
It's longer than that. I mean, I don't think there's been a Canadian team, just a single Canadian team, in the Stanley Cup for like 30 some odd years.
I know the
Two Canadian
Canadians
teams,
won
I
it.
think it almost goes back to the 60s.
Montreal Canadiens, I think, won it in '93 or something like that. I don't know if
Yeah,
anyone's
well,
won
that'd
it.
be right about 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so but what I'm trying to say is, like, and there's some good Canadian hockey teams, right? Like, but they would never, make it so that two Canadian teams make it to the finals together, because you're going to lose that US audience. They're not going to let it happen.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean with hockey. Like you said, you don't need Canadian teams to make it to the Stanley Cup finals for Canadians to watch.
Yeah.
We're going to watch whatever two teams basically that hit the ice for Stanley Cup finals, because they're crazy hockey fans, which is fine. But when you want to build up, teams, when you want to build up fan bases, well, maybe then you get the Floridas and the Texas teams and the, Los Angeles Kings and those sort of teams into the Stanley Cup finals, because then you build up a fan base where one never existed, because everybody loves a winner. And I find it, again, you want to talk about coincidences. The North Stars existed for how long as a franchise, but they didn't get to the Stanley Cup finals until they became the Dallas Stars. The
Right.
Hartford Whalers existed for 30 years. Suddenly they become the Hurricanes. In Carolina, they win the Stanley Cup finals. Quebec
Right.
Nordiques never made it, but when they became the Colorado Avalanche, they won the Stanley Cup. It's amazing that all these teams that were northern teams had no success, but as soon as they moved down south, hey, look at us, we won the Stanley Cup. Isn't that amazing? And suddenly this fan base generates all around it. Again, coincidence, or was that planned?
And now with the NBA, it's like building these superpower teams. That's another thing I hate. Superpower teams. I mean, what is the point of that? Like, again, are you like, is it just cementing like LeBron's legacy? Like, because he's getting older and they got to carry him. What is the deal with just overpowering certain teams because that bothers me as well. It's not even entertaining to watch. Whereas one team is completely beefed up with all these legends and all these great players and all these young studs, while other teams are completely like. So, can you tell me what the theory is behind superpower teams now? Is it again cementing player legacy? Is it just to build that team up in that geographical area? What's the deal with superpower teams?
I think it's a little bit about that. The NBA players have a little more pull for some reason in their league in terms of creating these teams. But I mean, I think it's interesting that when David Stern was the commissioner, there was, I mean, even though the NBA had whatever it was, 30 teams in it, it was like only six franchises existed. There was the Bulls, the Celtics, 76ers, the Lakers, kind of the Knicks, and the Spurs. And the rest of the league like didn't matter because that's the way David Stern ran it. I mean, he basically kind of forced that into being. Then when he moved on and Silver took over, now all of a sudden you see like Golden State winning, the Milwaukee Bucks winning. It's almost like he's finally giving out championships, like you say, to build up franchises in these other
Right.
leagues, in these other cities, because they were suffering for so long. And that's one way of doing it, to legitimize making the Bucks, potentially NBA Finals champion, is you build that team up and you give them a couple superstar players, and then people take notice of them, because otherwise who's going to pay attention to them? Who's paying attention to the Phoenix Suns? Well, suddenly, if they got three superstar players, you're going to pay attention to them. But otherwise, you wouldn't. And I think that's the way they do it. I think that's the way it helps build the fan base, which again helps solidify the league and also helps all the teams in the league make more money.
Look over here, look over here. Let's build this one. Let's build
Yeah.
this. Look over here, and then distraction over here. It's wild. What do you think about the UFC? I mean, that's one of those leagues that just seems relatively authentic. You got Dana White. It's a fight, right? I mean, do you think the UFC could also be fixed? Because that's one of those
Oh,
ones
yeah.
that it's hard to tell if it is though. Like it's a little. Do you think it's
No,
kind
it's
of hard?
fixed. It's
Well,
fixed.
can you give me some examples of what
No,
what would?
don't believe it's not fixed. Because here's the thing: if you look at the history of boxing, but boxing's been corrupt for over 100 years, and organized crime and mobsters have controlled boxing for decades upon decades. And I mean, they literally, I mean, if you go back 100 years, I mean, they literally would. There was a guy by the name of Primo Carnero, who was a heavyweight champion like back in the 1920s. Organized crime, the mob who ran him, literally fixed every one of his fights, including the heavyweight championship, to make him the heavyweight champion. And then, because they knew he couldn't fight, on his very first title defense, they bet everything against him, let the fight happen as it should, and he got knocked out. And the mob cleaned up. And that's the way they made money. But in the 1950s, when boxing was huge in the United States, it was literally one run by one mobster named Frankie Carbo. He dictated who fought, where they fought, when they fought, and oftentimes who won and who lost. He had that kind of control and power over all of boxing. And to me, Dana White has exactly that same kind of control over the UFC, because I think many times he determines who fights, when they fight, where they fight. And I also think in many ways he can control who wins and loses. Now, that's not to say, again, that every fight is fixed by any means, but I think that possibility is really there. And I think, especially again, if you look at boxing and the history of boxing, all those times you've seen a contender come up and he's finally getting his title chance and he's 22-0 with 20 knockouts. Well, chances are 20 or maybe all 22 of those fights that he fought in were fixed to get him to that title shot. And maybe the title fight's legit, but a lot of the building up fights are not. And
Where it
there's
gets Sorry, where it gets dicey with MMA is when it goes to decision. And I watched a fight and I could see, and that a certain fighter A outdid fighter B, and then fighter B gets the decision, and then that could
that's
be
another way.
subjective. Judges score in the favor of this because he had more knockdowns or he had more ground time. Again, we've seen it so many times. And again, like for example, where they do these catch weights or something where a lighter guy comes up, and it was like, for example, Volkanovski versus Islam was a fight. Where I watched that fight, I think Islam won that. I'm sorry, I think Volkanovski won that fight. He should have won that fight, but Islam got the decision. You can't have, this guy in a lower weight class come in and beat your champion because there's so much more he's got to do, so many more pay-per-views he's got to do. So yeah, I think that, when it goes to decision, it gets really dicey too.
Well, and I think too, like you mentioned, pay per view. That's the big thing. Is you want people to pay to see these fights. Well, to have a spectacle big enough for people to want to pay to put on, well, you got to arrange some fights, right? You got to arrange some matchups. And that's why I think a lot of times, again, because I don't follow UFC just because I feel that it's probably as rigged as boxing used to be. But when I was younger and followed boxing, how many times did you see fighter A would beat fighter B in one fight, then they'd have a rematch, and fighter B would beat fighter A, and then they'd have the third fight to
Yeah.
settle who's the best. Well, a lot of times that was staged. It was rigged. They would let one guy win one fight, one guy win the other, and then the real fight would be the third fight, and that would determine who really was the fighter. But they did that just to make more money and to get more buildup. And I think again, the UFC has those same tactics involved because pay-per-view is such a moneymaker for them that they have to build up these fights and fighters into these big extravagant events so people will tune in and fork out the 50, 60, $70, whatever it is, to watch them.
But I'm gonna be skeptical again, right? I'm gonna be one of those guys that doesn't believe this stuff. And I'm gonna say to you, well, okay, well, if this was fixed, wouldn't these players, these coaches, these referees really come out? Has there people that have come out and said that this is fixed? I was watching the Truman Show the other day. And this guy's living. If you haven't watched Truman Show, he's kind of in this bubble, and people try to fly down and tell him, "Hey, you're on a show. You're being watched by him." How many people have come out with this? And wouldn't there be more people coming out? Like if Cam Newton, like, oh, screw the NFL, I'm going to say that. Or is there something where their life's on the line or something like that? Why wouldn't there be more like noise?
Well, I think because of the proof. Because I think, it really boils down to two things is if you take a guy like Peyton Manning, if Peyton Manning said the NFL was fixed, first of all, his whole history is based off of the NFL, right? So how does he make his money if he's not known as an NFL athlete? Even these lower, that's what I mean, some of these lower guys who is just a center on the Super Bowl team, he could still make $25 signing autographs at a card show.
Doing cameos or something.
Yeah, there's ways to make money just because you're an NFL athlete or whatever. But the biggest thing is proof. Because, if Peyton Manning went on the, Manning cast on ESPN during Monday Night Football and said, hey, Eli, that Super Bowl against the Saints, I totally threw that game. I fixed it. I made sure. First of all, I think everybody, including Eli, would come out against Peyton because they'd be like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. And then if he was adamant, like, yeah, no, I totally fixed that game, their first thing would be, well, where's the proof? Prove to me that you fixed the game. He'd say, well, I threw that interception. Well, that was just a bad pass. Well, yeah, but I threw it intentionally. No, it was just a bad pass. The onus is on the guy making the accusation to come up with the proof and the evidence. And all these athletes, I don't think there's any proof or evidence that they naturally could provide unless somehow they've recorded some sort of conversation with some higher up that said, hey, I want you to tank this game. But when you have a guy like Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, go on the Dan Patrick Show and say, I told my team it's in their best interest to lose so we can get a better draft pick next year, and nobody blinked an eye about it. Well, what more do you need to know? An owner basically just admitted on a national radio and television show that he told his team to lose intentionally. He was fixing games in the NBA, and nobody batted an eye about it. Are they really going to believe anybody else coming forward?
Right. I think the major thing here is that just people, I think it's just going to upset the diehard fans because people think it's actually their team. So like I think you said before, I think that's the main kind of draw here. And I think a lot of people are just not going to be able to accept this. They're just not coming to terms with the fact that their favorite team that they watch every Sunday, that they live and bleed, they bleed those colors, are WWE at this point. I think that's the main thing, right? I think that's the main drawback. And I think that's why people are kind of put their blinders on. They just don't want to accept it.
No, and I agree. I've had a lot of conversations with sports fans, and you may be, an NFL fan and hate the NBA. And I'll say, oh, the NBA that, the NBA this. And they'll agree with me wholeheartedly. Yeah, I totally believe, the NBA is rigged and it's a terrible league and blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, oh, but in the NFL, these same things have occurred. They'll be like, no. Not in the NFL, not my team. No, because it winds up almost attacking them personally. Because, like you said, they've put so much time and energy and effort into becoming fans of this team or this league or this sport that they don't want to lose that outlet. They don't want to lose, that escape from the real world and have that all come crashing down on them. That realize that maybe it's not exactly what you thought it was, and that's a really hard thing for people to accept. Because it is something that many people take as being 100% real, and they don't take the time or energy to think about, well, is it? Is there more to it, and what does it all mean if it's not? And so, like I say, I think it's just that outside intrusion negatively affects them mentally, so they don't want to deal with it.
So there's gonna be tarnished legacies, probably some loss of revenue, but I still think people will watch the game. They need that outlet.
Yeah.
Do you think the truth will ever come out? It's like WWE, like because when I was young, I always thought WWE was real, and then we found out it's not. Do you think that it'll ever come out that this in fact is rigged? And everybody kind of comes to terms with it and accepts that we move forward, or do you think that's going to cause so much damage. It's irreparable. It'll just tarnish everything, and they can never admit it. Like, do you think it'll come out and they'll admit it, or do you think it'll just always be like this?
I think they'll try to keep it as under wraps as they can just because of the gambling end of it. Because, I mean, even though you can bet on professional wrestling in some places, you know, with all the money and all the eyes and attention that all these leagues are getting now because of legalized gambling, I don't think they want, obviously, this truth to be known. But I think down the line, at some point, the dam breaks. And I think, the real truth of it all will come out and it'll emerge. And I think, again, if fans watch and just watch with an objective eye, again, how many bad calls does it take before you realize that they're not bad calls? Like the referee that screwed up that Rams Saints pass interference call
Yeah.
that really affected who went to the Super Bowl. Did that referee get in trouble? Did he get fined? Did he get suspended? Did he lose his job for blowing that really important call? Or did they
No.
just let it go? Well, if I did my job like that, I'd be fired. I'd be reprimanded. But yet they let this guy just go on and officiate games like nothing happened. Well, maybe makes you wonder. Maybe that's exactly what he was told to do. Maybe he did his job perfectly correctly in the NFL's eyes. Maybe not in the fans' eyes, but in the league's eyes, he did it right, and that's why he didn't get in any trouble for it.
They just keep letting it slide, letting it slide, letting it slide.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, is there anything else that we missed that maybe, Joe, I know this, I've seen this, you've got the expert on. Is there anything else that we missed? Any golden nuggets that would kind of indicate that the NFL is fixed, that any inside information, any other things that we've overlooked that would kind of indicate and kind of hammer the point home to say people, hey, man, it really is. Other than just like we're seeing all this stuff, we've given all this proof, all these examples, all these coincidences. Is there anything else that we're overlooking here?
Well, I think, and that's a little bit more on the gambling end, but just the idea of games being fixed, because I think for a lot of the American sports fans, they don't even contemplate this idea of being possible, of games being fixed, even for gambling reasons, much less for the entertainment side. But because, the NFL says we've never had a game fixed ever in our history. 100 plus years, no one's ever fixed a game. Major League Baseball says it hasn't happened since the Black Sox scandal over 100 years ago. And it's been 70 some odd years since it supposedly really happened in the NBA. But if you look outside the United States, if you look at basically almost every other country in the world, and you look at soccer, you look at tennis, you look at rugby, you look at cricket, you look at badminton, you look at all these other sports, and there are match fixing scandals all over the globe. All over the globe. I mean, in Canada, in India, in Australia, in all over Europe, match fixing everywhere, but not in the United States. And can you name me any crime that happens worldwide that does not then happen in the United States? And
No.
game fixing would basically be the only one.
Man, that just says it right there. I'm sold. If I wasn't sold already and I wasn't asking questions, I think a lot of people are. Actually, I just did a survey here. Let me just check on it on my Instagram, and I got a big following here, 300,000 people. Now, not all of them have got in on the survey here, but I actually want to pull out here what people I said is the NFL fixed. And I just did a poll, and I'll give you the results right here. According to my football fans, oh man, hold on here. I got to vote here. Okay, so again, just a quick. It's not showing in clearly here. Is the NFL fixed? And you can't see it. There it
Well,
is.
you can see one bar's really big and one's really small.
Yeah, the yes. So if you can't see it there, 83% of my listeners think the NFL is fixed. So as you can see, I bet you if we did this a couple of years ago, it would be a lot lower.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I mean, I think it's one of those things. I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I mean, I was kind of the first one to really kind of publicly start questioning the NFL and all these other
Yeah.
leagues and the reality of it all. And I mean, I know other guys have got more followers, put up YouTube videos that have gotten 1 million views and whatever, and then I haven't. But a lot of these guys also use my research and what I've done because I'm the only person who bothered to take the time to actually dig into this and research it and show that, like, these laws, which, what, that there's no law that prevents a league from fixing their game, what the actual laws are, and those sort of things. I did all that digging, I did all that legwork, and it's fine that other people are climbing on top of it. But I mean, I think it is a thing that's really sprung up in the past decade, where more and more people are hearing about it, more and more people are thinking about it, and seeing the results of these games and these bad calls, supposedly. And they're starting to come to their own conclusions that this isn't really all on the level like it should be.
They're just going to keep showing up. A good example of this is the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? One of the most lucrative franchises out there. The team sucks. They haven't won a Stanley Cup since, like, I don't know, 1968 or something stupid like that. And they keep supporting them. They keep supporting
Yeah.
these losers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they'll sell, nosebleeds for $500. And people, the secret is, guys, you got to boycott these games. You got to stop going to these games until they fix their team. Like, why would you watch losers every single year? You're subjecting yourself to pain. Like, it's insane that the people keep supporting these guys no matter what happens.
Yeah, it's like Cub fans. Chicago Cubs fans are the same way. I
Yeah.
mean, 100 years without, World Series, Cleveland Indians. So, sorry, not the Indians anymore, the
Yeah.
Guardians.
Everyone's going to get offended now.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's the thing is, supporters for year. And I think that's the only way. I think fans have more power than they realize, because I think, because it is all about money for the leagues. I mean, they don't put the games on for free. They put the games on to make money. And so I think if fans started to stop watching, stop going to the game, stop turning on their TVs, and just literally stopped, I think the leagues would wake up and be like, oh, we got to change how we do business because fans don't want to watch anymore. But
Yeah.
you have to be willing to stop watching. And it's hard because a lot of sports fans are addicted. It's like a drug and they can't get off of it. But if you can, then perhaps that power would sink into the leagues and they would change the way they do business.
Especially in a world where, people want outlets, what the world is now, inflation, money, like, you need an escape, and
Everybody does.
sports is that. So on a positive end, it does benefit a lot of people. It makes their life better. It gives them something to look forward to for people that don't have stuff to look forward to in their regular stuff. It's an outlet for a lot of people, even for me. Like, when I lost my dad, I turned to fantasy sports and I made it a business. I used it as an outlet. It was a distraction and helped me build a very good business for me, becoming the face of fantasy and really growing the brand to number one. So because of sports, I was able to do that. So again, I'm not here to knock the leagues, but we're just here to raise some truth and awareness about this. That's what
Yep.
I'm here to do. And, a lot of people have questions. They're curious. And hopefully I asked all the right questions and laid out everything I possibly could. In the comments, guys, feel free to ask any questions, drop them below. And I guess if you see this, maybe you can get to some of them. I don't know.
Well,
But
people can always email me too.
yeah, so how do we get a hold of
Yeah,
you? What's the website? The fixesin.net?
exactly. Yep.
Okay. Head on over to thefixesin.net, grab the book, The Fix is In, and The Fix is Still In. What's the difference between the two books? Like, is it just an updated version?
No, The Fix is Still In is a different book. It's like a sequel of sorts, but it's a lot of the stuff because, like I said, the original book, The Fix is In, came out in 2010, and of course, a lot of stuff happened between then and now. And The Fix is Still In, I think, published in 2019, right before the pandemic, and it just got a lot of different information that I found after doing The Fix is In, and updates a lot of stuff that occurred in those 10 years.
Are you going to do a third version soon?
Not necessarily soon. I think some more crap has to happen. But yeah, that's always a real possibility to do it because this stuff doesn't go away. I mean, it just
Yeah.
keeps happening, and in some cases, gets worse.
Well, people are waking up, and the power of social media, we're seeing it more and more because you can go back, replay it, watch it. More people talking about it, going viral. It's wild. So yeah, make sure you stay on for a minute after we
Sure.
end it here. But guys, we appreciate you listening. Is the NFL and all sports, are they rigged? Are they fixed? Drop it in the comments below. I think we've built a compelling case here. And I was trying to play a little skeptical a little bit at times, but because I'm just a firm believer and I'm totally sold. Like the 83% of the listeners that are just on my Instagram alone there, that the fix is definitely in. And you wrote about it, one of the first guys, if not the first guy, to really bring some attention to it. Brian Tuohy, man, I appreciate you coming on. It means a lot.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Drop your questions, subscribe, thumbs up. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and smash that thumbs up and hit the subscribe. We're out. Thanks, Brian.
Go hard.